Welcome to People in Transition, the show where we explore the pivotal moments that change lives, careers, and purpose. I'm your host, Bob Gerst, and today's guest is someone who truly embodies transformation through adversity and purpose-driven leadership. Merry Korn is a serial entrepreneur, speaker, author, and advisor, and the visionary founder of Pearl Interactive Network, one of the most successful for-profit social enterprise firms in the country. Over more than 2 decades, Mary built Pearl from the ground up into a nationally recognized organization, scaling it to more than 1,300 employees across 30 states. What made Pearl extraordinary wasn't just its growth, it was its mission. Under Mary's leadership, the company created thousands of meaningful jobs for disabled veterans, military spouses, people with disabilities, and individuals living in economically challenged and geographically isolated communities. At the heart of Mary's success is a deeply held belief in people first leadership, a conviction that when employees know they matter, they perform at their best. That philosophy earned her national recognition from organizations like Ernst & Young, the U.S. Business Leadership Network, NPR, and numerous businesses and diversity awards. Today, after selling Pearl, Mary is focused on helping others navigate career transition, business growth, and personal reinvention through speaking, advising, and her writing. Her story includes job loss, fear, faith, resilience, and ultimately extraordinary impact. I'm so excited for her to share the lessons she's learned along the way. Please join me in welcoming Merry Korn. Mary, thanks for being with us.
Bob, I'm honored to be your guest.
Let's jump right in. I think that it would be useful for our audience to know a little bit about what has shaped you and some of the transitions that you've gone in, some of those what I call disruptions in your career path. You were fired from a job after only about 2 months. Looking back, first of all, why did you take that role? What do you think you should have known before taking that? And what advice would you give listeners who are considering a new job, but they might feel uncertain about it?
Bob, I never should have taken the job without listening to my instincts and my gut. And I knew all along I saw red flags, and I absolutely positively ignored them all. If I had to do it over again, I would have had a coach like you to guide me, think this through, and not do a knee-jerk reaction and take the first job that came along. And so the big mistake I made is I acted very quickly without a lot of thought about the lack of alignment between who I am and the culture of the company that I went to work for.
How do you find out about that culture of the company? What are some tips, techniques that our listeners should use?
In hindsight, there are so many things I would have done differently. That is an excellent question. A really good way to find out is LinkedIn is so amazing and awesome that it doesn't take too long to find someone who knows someone who works for the organization and get the inside track. So that kind of research, reading reviews, if I had read the reviews, I would have learned that there was a tremendous amount of turnover and that the executive at the helm of the organization was well known within the organization to be verbally. And there's so much research I could have done ahead of time that I was just so wanting to make a change that I just left at the first opportunity. Many, many mistakes.
Mary, you describe feeling lost and confused and even afraid after losing that job. Can you describe some of those emotions? Where do you think they come from? And what helped you move out of the fear into forward motion for your job search?
You ask some great questions, Bob. The feelings were absolutely paralyzed with fear, literally waking up with nothing, ground zero. I didn't know if I could stay in my house, pay the utility bills, and most important, feed my kids. And it's a terrifying feeling of my children depend on me. What am I going to do? And where am I going to go? And if any of your listeners are in that situation where they've been fired or they think they're going to be fired, if I relay anything, is just have faith. You will get through this. It may not seem like it, but you will. And then in answer to your question of how did I pull through it? So there were two role models for me as I was going through the depths of what I call in my book ground zero. One inspiration was my mother, who was a Holocaust survivor who jumped off a train at the age of 13, a train meant for the death camps. And she jumped off a train with SS soldiers with machine guns, and she jumped anyway. And near the end of her time in the concentration camp, she escaped from the death march. So here I had this incredibly brave woman who was facing life and death, which I wasn't. And then the final act of courage of my mother, who was my great inspiration, was she came to this country divorced, single mom with two kids under the age of 8, didn't speak the language, didn't have a job, and $125 to her name. So as I was pulling myself out of this era of feeling lost, confused, terrified, I would often channel my mother, who taught me that no matter what, you always keep one foot in front of the other.
What a powerful, powerful lesson. And I can see how that something like that would motivate you for sure.
Absolutely.
Once the immediate fear about supporting yourself and your family eased up some, what were the first really concrete steps you took to find your next great job that our listeners might be able to use as they're moving forward in their search?
So, Bob, if there was someone like you in my life at the time, it could have been easier. But for many, many years, one of the reasons I took a job I was ill suited to was because I had been in a previous job that I'd been in for 14 years, and I was like a walking zombie, just getting through the days, no connection, no alignment with my work. And during that period, I went to a career coaching company. If I walked away with anything, there were two things I walked away with. One is that based on a tremendous amount of testing, I learned that I'm absolutely attracted to leadership and social mission. But the other thing I learned was the art of the informational interview. Interview is an amazing tool. So once you do the work to find out what your life mission is, for people who are lost, the informational interview is a way you can connect with the job of your dreams or launch the business that you've always wanted to launch. And the art of the informational interview is very simple. It's structured conversations with people you know or even people you don't know that will lead you to discussions of how you use your skills, your talents, your values, and your interests to move forward into doing work that resonates with your mission and your heart.
Mary, you have talked about internal work that is needed before you actually can be successful in your job search. How do you recommend for someone who's lost their job or may lose their job to do that internal work, but wants to make certain that they take the right next step so that they are aligned with what they discover in that internal work with companies that they're talking with?
I cannot say enough about the importance of that's invaluable. But if your listeners don't feel that at this moment in time, the resources are there, there are so many books I could recommend. Among them, tried and true is What Color is Your Parachute? The Artist Way. There's one book that has a really fun title. I don't know what I want to do, but it's not this. So there are a series of books that are excellent guidebooks for helping people figure out what it is they want to do and how to do that internal excavation.
And you mentioned this before, but certainly LinkedIn has a number of resources as well that are at the disposal of a job seeker.
Oh, LinkedIn is wonderful. And I can't say enough, whether you've lost your job, you think you're going to lose your job, or you can't stand your job and you want to get out, it is always available to you to begin to make a list of everyone you know in all aspects of your life. They could be parents of kids that your children go to school with, people in your church, people in your Rotary. But it's so important for you to look at anyone you know who's doing work that resonates with you and schedule a time and talk to them. What skills they needed. Ask them what kind of skills you have that could be transformative. Ask all kinds of questions about where you would live, what a day in the life would look like. The informational interview serves a multitude of functions. Number one, it serves as a great connection tool with people who are already doing work that you think you might want to do. Number two, every call that you have with these individuals, it's so important to ask who they know, who else you should talk to. And believe it or not, it was the informational interviews that led to creating my business that eventually grew to 1,300 employees.
You're really talking about the power of networking.
Yes.
And so many people view either networking as a negative or they're convinced that they don't know anyone that they can network with, or they're just afraid to do that. Give us a few tips in terms of how to make networking not sound like a dirty word.
Begin with the people you're closest to. It's a wise idea to do people you're really close to because they'll give you honest feedback and you're going to find through experience, just like anything else that seems hard, riding a bike, learning to drive, that the more you do it, the easier it becomes. But I would absolutely recommend sitting down and making a list of all the people you could ask, would you mind doing an informational interview? And even if they're not doing work that you think you want to do, it's a great practice run. It's someone you feel really safe with. They'll give you some practical tips. But you have to start somewhere. And the easiest way to start with anyone you know that you feel close and safe with.
Let's say that I have that discussion with my inner circle and I now want to expand out from there. Any other thoughts that you would share with a job seeker to help them expand that network?
Bob, your questions are so excellent. And the answer is then you get further away from your inner circle because it only expands to just a certain extent. Then think of people that might be warm acquaintances, people you've met through work, through different groups. And your ask is very simple. And it's a very simple script. And this is the script I used that started my business and I used till I sold the business. And the script is very simply, hi, my name is Bob. I've had 35 years of experience in the HR consulting field. And I'm so intrigued by the work you do, and I'm so intrigued by the business that you work for. I was hoping to schedule a 20-minute discussion with you about how I might transition my skills and my interest into a field very similar to what you're doing. So, Bob, notice I'm not asking for a job. I'm asking just for a discussion to learn more about what that person does. And this is a technique, believe it or not, that could be far more effective in looking or finding the right job than randomly gunshot approach to finding a job. People like to hire people they know, and they like to hire people that someone else might have recommended, oh, you should talk to this person.
Yes, and people like to talk about themselves and what they do. So they have an interest in terms of helping you out.
Truly.
You founded Pearl Interactive as a for-profit social enterprise focused on hiring people with barriers to employment. How did that business model emerge for you? And what are the lessons that our listeners can use to help them in their job search?
Again, a really good question. It's a movie that some of your listeners may have seen. It's called Schindler's List. And Oskar Schindler was a German industrialist that discovered something incredibly powerful and lingering. And by the way, the movie Schindler's List was produced by Steven Spielberg. But the movie was about a man who discovered that if you create jobs, you can save lives. And I never forgot how that movie shaped lives. And I never forgot how desperate, alone, and scared I was. And what I discovered through the course of my business is that I first started hiring people with the greatest barriers to work. I hired people who were paraplegic. I hired people who were blind. I hired people who had multiple challenges. And what I discovered is I was giving them much more than a job. I was creating meaning. It was much more than just collecting a paycheck, because the populations that I hired, many of them had been searching for jobs for 5 years, 7 years. And given that I was a clinical social worker by background and I love business, I knew that it was my destiny to do this work, to hire the most unemployable. And to your listeners, getting back to your question, is your listeners, whether they feel desperate because they're stuck in jobs that have no meaning, or they're feeling incredibly afraid because of the lack of stability of their job, part of our journey is finding what we're supposed to do next. And what I implore your audience to do is be fearless, take the next step, and know that through a period of time, through these constant conversations. And by the way, when I was in the midst of figuring out my next, I had a goal of scheduling 3 to 4 informational interviews a day. And within 6 weeks of having lost my job, I had my first client. So in answer to your question, for people who are listening, you have to put blinders on to the fear, keep one step going forward. Podcast with one key next step is make the list of people you're going to call today to schedule time for an informational interview.
Mary, you write about a spiritual connection that helped guide you at key moments. Can you explain that to our listeners and maybe share an example of when you felt especially guided forward on your next step to finding that great job?
It was about a week or so after I was fired. I was walking down an alley and I was praying. And I'm not going to get religious, I'm more spiritual than religious, but I remember praying. And I said, okay, God, here it is. I'm absolutely lost. I have 2 children I have to support. You got to help me out here. You got to give me an answer, and I'll make a deal with you. And by the way, I believe you can make bargains with just God or the divine source. And the deal I made with this divine source is, okay, here it is. God, if you tell me what to do next, I promise you that for the next several years of my life, I'm going to teach a course on feeling fear and overcoming it and doing it anyway. And suddenly I heard this deep intuitive voice. And the deep intuitive voice said, you need to call on medical associations. And Bob, as soon as I got home, I didn't question it because I knew it was the right thing to do. I started making cold calls to executive directors of medical associations, and my script was very simple. I have had 25 years of marketing experience, and I want to understand marketing and medical experience. I want to understand, how do I convert my marketing and sales and healthcare experience into working with medical associations. And it's a rule of 2080. I probably left a total of 80 messages. I got 20 responses. And for those of you on this call, even if it's people you know, sometimes people are busy and distracted and they may not call you. So what? You just keep moving forward. So the answer is keep moving forward. The informational interviews, you will only gain from it. And if the least thing you walk away with is a new relationship, that's worthwhile. And for people who decide to use the informational interviews, never end the conversation without asking, who else should I talk to? And never begin the conversation with, I'm looking for a job. Because if you say, I'm looking for a job, there's a really good chance they may not have one and the conversation will end. So always use in your script, I'm trying to understand how to transition from here.
It brings to mind one of the things that I have heard over the years is that networking is more about giving than it is receiving. You need to be prepared to help the person that you're speaking with.
Beautiful.
Thoughts on that, Mary?
Absolutely. So I just gave a presentation at Ohio State to graduate students on the course of informational interviews. And we did a role play on talking to a chief information officer who was really struggling with how do you transition from a traditional company to one that is migrating to AI. And let's say you're somebody who has a lot of great experience with AI. And as long as it's authentic, there is nothing wrong with saying, this is an informal discussion. You have nothing to lose, but asking the person you're talking to, if you're telling me you have challenges with AI, I'm happy to hear what your challenges are, and maybe I can help you with them. And that could be a door opener, because if I were a chief information officer struggling with how to migrate to AI, I would love to hear from anyone I'm talking to.
So, one of the things that I've noted in my practice is that while people are looking for a job, that they sometimes don't spend the time necessary to keep up their physical well-being. What's the
Oh,
impact
yes.
on that whole physical part of your life? And what are some of the suggestions that you would make to someone to ensure that they keep that at the highest level?
I'm glad you asked that. So there are a whole myriad of techniques for beginning to overcome fear. And one I highly recommend is exercise. And I actually did research into it. And you don't have to search too hard to find it. But when people lose their jobs, they don't feel any sense of control over their lives. But one thing they can control is their bodies. And there are so many free things you can do to assist you with getting on an exercise regime. There are cable television shows, there are YouTubes, but even just walking or running in your neighborhood, it will give you some sense of control. And by the way, it's the fact that it's physically good for you is wonderful. But exercise is just one of many techniques for getting beyond the paralysis of fear.
What would you say are the pillars of your book, Mary? And why do you think they're especially relevant for people who are in job transition?
There are three pillars of the book. One is focused on overcoming fear. The second one is finding your life purpose. And the third one is you overcome the fear, you find your life purpose, the holy grail of informational interviews to find the job or create the business or create the volunteer work that will satisfy your soul. So those are the three key pillars of the book, and all of them are relevant to anybody who's lost their job, thinking that they might lose their job, or desperate to move on.
What do you say to the person who has been out of work for 6, 9 months, maybe even a year, and you're going to talk with them about overcoming fear or finding purpose, and they're going to say, I just need to have some income. How do you help that person?
First of all, just like any kind of counseling, I would begin with where they are. And if where they are is a very real fear of not having work, if I were coaching them like you are, I would coach them to stem the bleeding and find something, ideally something that resonates, ideally something that would put them in the flow of the type of work that they want to do, and highly encourage them to address what hurts them the most while doing a parallel path while they stem the bleeding in terms of the financials, they still keep their eyes on doing work that's fulfilling to their soul.
You mentioned 3 books earlier. Are there other books or resources that you think that the job seeker should?
Well, I just completed a book called Fired to Inspired. It will be out hopefully by the end of first quarter 2026. And on my website, Fired to Inspired, there is a free Embracing Courage workbook, which is all about overcoming fear. And I would highly recommend people go to that workbook because it gives all kinds of tips and pointers on how to overcome fear. And as I mentioned earlier in this discussion, I cannot say enough about finding coaches like you, Bob, because sometimes that healing discussion could be one step towards moving forward, an important step.
Mary, have you coached anyone that didn't end up with a good outcome? And what do you learn from that, a little bit more negative experience to be careful to stay away from?
You have to stay away from negativity. A lot of times, I've taught this course on feeling fear and living your life anyway for years and years and years. And one of the things I talk about is I'd love to think that all of your listeners have functional, healthy, normal families and support group. A lot of people don't have that. You're going through a job search. It could be one of the most vulnerable times in your life. It's so important to surround yourself by a support team that believes in you and encourages you. And as much as possible, you can't eliminate your family as much as people might want to, but you cannot listen and take to heart people who don't have your back and don't support you.
Mary, we've covered so much great advice, thoughts, tips, and techniques. If you could speak directly to someone who's listening right now who feels stuck or afraid, doesn't know what steps to take, what would you coach them on?
First and foremost, talk to a coach. Find a coach because that one-on-one connection can be invaluable. Libraries have, I know in Columbus, Ohio, based out of, there's support groups that deal with people that are at some stage of transition. I can't say enough about those support groups. Reading could be invaluable. There are so many books on this topic. So those are just some top pointers on what to do next. And never, never, never give up. And don't just jump to a job. Do not just jump to a job unless it's just temporary. Do the work. Work on overcoming the fear. Find what your true life purpose and your mission is, and use the informational interviews. Again, the 3 pillars we talked about.
Mary, thank you so much for sharing your story so openly and generously today. What stands out so clearly is that your success didn't come from avoiding fear or disruption, but from walking straight through it with intention, faith, and respect for people. Your journey reminds us that losing a job or feeling stuck is not the end of the story. In many cases, it's really the beginning of something far more aligned with who we are and who we are meant to be. You've shown us that purpose and profit can coexist. That leadership starts with empathy, and that when people know they matter, extraordinary things can happen. Thank you, Mary, for being such a strong example of what's possible when we choose courage, connection, and purpose in times of transition. And to my listeners, thank you for joining us on People in Transition. I'm Bob Gers. Until next time, remember, transitions don't define you, but how you move through them just might be that definition. Thanks, Mary. Goodbye.
You a joy.